we sort of lost sight of it and started thinking that industrial policy, big business type of stuff is the way we're going to grow Oklahoma, but that's not how Oklahoma started. Well, entrepreneurs are often that same way. They believe nobody has gone through what they have to go through.
One of the advantage some entrepreneurs have is that they don't know what they can't do, right?
I've got one of my tenants, she does first aid kits for hunting dogs. I'd love to have someone with the audacity of a Jeff Bezos in my incubator.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Direct Edge, where we explore strategic thinking behind sustainable business growth. And in particular, this episode, we'll be talking about earlier stage entrepreneurship and how we find and create opportunities. And joining me is Brad Rickelman, director of Meridian Technology Center in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Spent decades working with entrepreneurs and looking at different business ideas and still helping budding entrepreneurs find success. So with that, Brad, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon.
Great. Well, tell us more about, the Meridian Technology Center. What is it? What do you do? How do people engage?
Yeah. Meridian Technology Center is a regional vocational school. Most of what we do is we do vocational training for secondary and post-secondary students, right? Welding, cosmetology, CNA, all that stuff. But the state of Oklahoma decided a few years ago that we want to do more for entrepreneurs. And who or how can we connect with entrepreneurs? And they look to their regional vocational schools saying, well, they're already in the regions. They tend to know a lot of the people in those communities. They're kind of used to doing it because, right, somebody wants to open an auto shop, they're going to hire our students, these kinds of things. And so they tasked us with working to develop programs to help entrepreneurs in our communities. And so one of the ways they glommed onto this was to create a series of business incubators, which are relatively well known in entrepreneurship circles, but those incubators work with local businesses. Some are high growth, some aren't. Give them space, help them out, and then develop. And so that's what I've been doing the last 18, 19 years. And the programs in Oklahoma have been since the mid-90s. And so, across the state, we have a series of incubators and programs helping entrepreneurs in Oklahoma. So that's what we do.
Nice. So I know from, when I'm not running, our business or online ventures or helping entrepreneurs, I teach at the university level too. And I teach, usually marketing, entrepreneurship, finance, and business strategy. And I know from working at various different institutions that there are two different ways to approach entrepreneurship. One of them, in the university environment anyway, one of them is to approach it as small business management, right? We deal with florists and plumbers and landscapers, et cetera, and teaching them how to use QuickBooks and invoice and hire and fire and plan and do all of that kind of stuff. And the other way, and certainly in a lot of four-year universities, we're teaching students about how to build scalable businesses, scalable traded sector businesses. Traded sector meaning I'm doing business with people outside the local community. So, looking for the next Amazon or next Google or next Microsoft or something like that, although that's exceedingly hard to do. So what would you say your approach is? I mean, where would you fall in that continuum?
I think Stillwater has a major research university, Oklahoma State University, in our community. And certainly, on occasion, I'll pick up a graduate student, a faculty member, somebody with something just like you're describing, a high growth or opportunity for a high growth product. And the requirements at universities usually is that only a certain amount of their time can be devoted on campus to entrepreneurial ventures. And so they're often looking for a place to drop in to build that business off campus. And so we're a natural connection to that. And I do get a sliver of that. And like you said, a lot of Main Street businesses are in town. But what we found is that there are a lot of people out there, even in communities like Stillwater, that have products, usually a physical product, which is doing okay, but with a little bit of help could turn into something nice. I mean, it's more than just a floral shop. It could be something that could actually build. Now, it may not grow to the level of uh, $10 million plus a year in sales, but between 1 and 10, there can be 3, 4, 5 of those bouncing around in almost any community in America with an idea, and they're normally they've come into it sort of backed in some way, and they really didn't think about it like this student or this faculty member that's saying, I want to get to this scale, right? But they've sort of backed into scale, and now they're ready to make maybe the next step, or maybe maybe grow a little further, and they're in there. So I think it's about a third, third, third. And then there's a
Hmm.
group of people that have thought about starting a business their whole life and probably never will. But at the same time, that's okay. That's part of what it is in our communities to help people have an opportunity to develop and grow a business. And so we need them too. And so I
Sure.
want everybody to feel like it's at least something they could do, even if they don't do it. And some of them, with a little bit of work, can turn into something that's, you get 25 employees or something in a community like Stillwater, 50,000 residents. That's a good business. And if they're
Sure.
happen to be programmers or happen to be engineers, that's an even better business. They're going to pay better market rate. So I mean, it's a bit of a play to help, but I think it's there, and I think in almost any reasonable sized community, they're out there. But you got to find them and help them grow and go on from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up another topic because I mentioned Eastern Oregon University, which is based in a rural community in La Grande, Oregon. I mean, the population is 13,000 people. And, if you look at the community, the largest employer is probably the university, and the second largest is the hospital. And then there's a trailer factory. And it used to be these lumber mills, but um, usually they had 30 around the valley, but there's down to two, I think, these days. So that's kind of gone away. So they're looking for other alternatives. But I was talking with an economic development person there, and I said, you have a tremendous shadow industry happening here. And he said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, we run our business, Airmail, from here in La Grande, but you don't really seem to know about us. We've got this company called Dainty Jewels down the road. The lady she's really amazing. You could look her up online too. Dainty Jewels. She does modest clothing for, mostly Christian women, but for any women really. And she does all her own designs, has a manufacturing ship there. And that little business, I mean, it does millions of dollars of business. They do trunk shows in the southern part of the United States and stuff, but they're based in La Grande, Oregon. There's another company called muzzleloader.com. And my neighbor's Wind River something, I can't remember. He does plastic holsters, and they do a ton of plastic holsters, which is popular, I guess, in open carry states. And what else? There was there's a guy there, my neighbor down the road, who did circuit boards. His company did circuit board layouts and stuff for companies all over the world. And so it's this huge industry, or a bunch of companies that are operating online virtually, that the local community or local economic development person had no idea they even existed.
Right. If you don't show up for a chamber event or something like that, you're off their radar. You don't exist. And yet there you are doing these things. And I think any community has these people. Why? And of course, mostly they're doing their own thing. And I'm not saying help like I'm here to help you, but I'm saying
Mhm.
it doesn't take many of those in any community to make a significant difference in that community. And no one even knows it's there. So you're absolutely right. So I agree. I love it.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, it was my friend Brandon across the street. He was a broker selling airplanes too, like, hobby airplanes, propeller planes and stuff like that. And I think he made, I don't know, I mean, a lot of money doing that. But But I mean, it seems like there's a lot of those kind of opportunities too that wouldn't just be limited to the trades, other things that people have an expertise in that could bring value to the local community. And
Absolutely.
how do we get them engaged, and how to give them the tools they need to be successful?
And how to and I like your use of the word engagement. How to get them engaged where they feel like they're part of a community, and I'm sure they contribute. All those probably contribute to local, baseball team or whatever like that. But I mean, contribute to
Mhm.
the entrepreneurial community of other people kind of trying these things. And the great thing about those types of people is they tended to sort of grow it themselves. And so they're very used to helping somebody else out because they don't come into it like with big sharp elbows. They're more like, I'm doing this thing, it's working out great. And you're like, would you like to talk to somebody who's kind of working their way through something? And so there's this tremendous opportunity of people that are outside of that normal realm of either, like you say, the Main Street businesses or these high growth. They're doing slide decks, they're taking slide decks to people. You probably get a bunch of these. And so in between there is a bunch of people that I think if we put a little bit of whether it's assistance, help, just interaction, they can be a tremendous driver in all of our communities. And so certainly in Oklahoma, we see it. And some of our greatest successes in Oklahoma have been exactly that. Some guy or gal started a business and it became Love's Truck Stops, or it became, all these big companies, that are known, Phillips Petroleum and all these companies. They all started with one or two people going, let's make this thing happen. So we have a history of it in Oklahoma, but for some reason we sort of lost sight of it and started thinking that industrial policy, big business type of stuff is the way we're going to grow Oklahoma. But that's not how Oklahoma started. That wasn't how our communities, and I'm sure that Oregon is the same. We didn't start that way. So what can we do to create this sort of a engine, locally, so to speak, but yet, like you say, grows the pie from outside the community? And if we could put a little bit of effort there, I think good things will come out of that. And it's achievable in a way that getting Google to come to your town may not be achievable for various reasons. So I think that's kind of where I try to spend my time, is find some people that are doing some good things and see what I can do to help them do even better.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, and big business isn't a fit for everyone either. I mean, not everyone wants to, you know, you punch a card at 8 a.m. or 8:30 or whatever. Too. I guess we start a little later on the West Coast, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I pulled up this website again. Charity Walter is her name, the lady who started Dainty Jewels, and this has turned into a large business, a large local business. And she started out really doing these designs in the bedroom. I remember she talking about doing these designs at home and having all this stuff piled up on the bed, and they ran out of space. So they eventually got this warehouse, and they're doing great stuff. But, there's opportunities like that all over. And I think, if we really dug into the numbers, I've never seen any research like this, but I think we would find that there's a growing shadow economy across the country of businesses just like this.
Remember the book a few years back? I think it was The Millionaire Next Door or something like that. It came out.
Oh, right.
It's
Yeah.
been a while, but it was this idea that the guy with the junkyard down the street is making $1 million a year and nobody knows it. So in a way, if we think about entrepreneurship, why don't we get more of those guys or gals? Because we know those are capable of being developed in our communities, as opposed to some of the other ways in which people have looked at entrepreneurship over the while. And at the very least, we're helping our neighbors. And I think that's the other aspect, right? At the very least, if we can try to work to help this better, get this business get better, or if you do some sort of a program where you get some funds to these kinds of startups that have the right circumstances and the right situation, at least you're pouring it back into your own communities. So at the very worst, you go and you stand up in front of everybody and you go, well, we did this and it didn't work out, but at least it was here that we did it, right? We didn't send somebody with a bag to Taiwan to try to go gather somebody for you. Instead, we put it in your businesses, your people.
Right. I mean, there's a piece of that, but I mean, that's the other reason to focus on traded sectors. So we can, so it is a form of economic development. We're not just taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other. We're actually creating value and bringing some of that value from places outside of our community. So and I got to know, I got to know Charity and this company, her business, Dainty Jewels, because I brought them in. Well, somebody local told me about them, but then during this entrepreneurship program, or in the program we built at Eastern Oregon, I brought her in to speak, and one of the things that I learned from Tim Draper was the founder of Draper Fisher Jurvetson, a tier one California VC. He was like a key investor in Hotmail and Skype and just a bunch of stuff. He's done Bitcoin stuff. Um, Robinhood, I think maybe even a piece of that. I mean, just a bunch of different things. Um, and he said he told me once, he said, the one thing that people neglect is that it's important to have skills, people with skills and entrepreneurs with the initiative, and it's important to have access to capital, but it's really important to have heroes. People that entrepreneurs can look at and say, if that person could do it, I can do it too. And that inspirational presence turns to be pretty important in entrepreneurship. And so we started something called pub talks at Eastern Oregon, where I'd bring in these entrepreneurs, and there was a local pub in town. One of our student projects is we helped create this pub, work with the founder. He did the real work. I mean, but as student project, we helped and created. It was called Side A Brewing, still there, still thriving. But Side A had a back room, so we would rent out that back room. The university would bring in the equipment, and we would invite these founders, influential founders, and tell them to share their journey with us. How did you come up with the idea? Why did you think that was a good idea? What does the journey look like? And where are you going next? And what kind of advice would you give for other people who want to follow in your footsteps? And we did a bunch of those, and Charity didn't do a full. I don't think did a full pub talk, but she did do a version in our classroom of that. She was busy, but we've had. We had one of the co-founders of Voodoo Donuts.
Oh yeah.
We
Okay.
had
I've
a
seen.
country music singer, right? She was talking about her career and how she built it, and just a bunch of interesting stuff like that. But I do think this idea of heroes finding, being able to find and highlight success can often breed success. So tell me about that. Do you do anything like that in your
I
community,
do.
and what does
When
that
we
look like?
when we do our classes, we often I'll try to bring in a local entrepreneur. So many people that a name that somebody would go, "Oh, I know that person," or "I've heard their name," right? And inevitably they come in, and one, you're absolutely right. They'll come in and they'll talk about their journey, and inevitably they're, at least here in Stillwater, I found they're very humble about how they became as well, did as well as they have, right? They're like, we did these things and we did the other. And then the second part is that I think just like when you're a teenager, the great lie is nobody understands what I'm going through, right? When you're a teenager, you're like, no, my parents don't understand. Nobody's ever gone through what I go. Well, entrepreneurs are often that same way. They believe nobody has gone through what they have to go through. And all of a sudden, when you get people talking to one another, they realize lots of other people are going through the same sort of problems, right? Employees and sales and this and that. And I think there's a tremendous change in their attitudes because instead of this sense of, I'm beating my head alone on this, they realize lots of people are going through what I'm doing. They maybe not the same industry, but they're the same types of things. And then they start talking to one another. And actually, I become less important. And I think that by
Mhm.
bringing in, just like you say, a successful entrepreneur or someone who they can look to, one, it's a hero. It's somebody they can look to and go, well, they've done it. I can do it. But second, they realize they're not magically different than I am. They've been able to do certain things, and they realize that this is something that I can also do if I come with the right attitude towards how these things are going to happen. And I build up those people around me who can help me come with good advice, or at least somebody to bounce something off or not be alone. And I think that's really an advantage to anything you can do when you can gather entrepreneurs together is not necessarily the topic, of course, marketing or accounting or whatever, but really it's when they start to interact with one another is when good things happen because they start realizing there's things they can learn. And I think that's a real positive that comes out of exactly what you're talking about. Getting those local entrepreneurs who are successful to be able to just come in and talk for a few minutes with people about how they've got where they're at. And everybody just starts going, oh, okay. I see how I can squint and see myself being like that in some way. And I think that's a tremendous advantage as people working as they grow. Plus, the other good thing is that oftentimes those entrepreneurs are very interested in finding out what other people are doing, right? A successful entrepreneur often is very interested in what else is going on. And if it's in their own community, especially so. And so they often in a way where they're like, well, let me know what's going on. And if you ever run into something, give me a call or something. And that's a tremendous advantage to feel like you're part of something else. And I think that
Sure.
plays in it too. I mean, I think Brad Feld's work often talks about how, right, this key idea of this, that the entrepreneurs are the center, right? They're the ones that really make things happen. We're all sort of around them helping nurture that. But you got to have them interacting. And I think that that's true. It just plays into it in a way where they become the center of what's going on rather than me. I'm just there to help out.
Right. Yeah, I used this piece the other day in class for a different reason though, on a piece on WeWork. I didn't. Do you
Yeah,
remember those
sure I know
guys?
WeWork. Sure I do.
Yeah. And they scaled that up to, I don't know, the company had a $20 billion valuation or
Yeah, it was
something,
crazy
and then
stuff.
just melted down in a period of weeks. And but the premise, and so that there's another lesson there in terms of valuations and and substance over promises and a whole bunch of stuff like that. But what's interesting is the premise was that entrepreneurs, working alone have one level of potential, but working together, there's something more, and even though I talk about these shadow businesses, which is all great, but it's good to get people together so they can share ideas, they can feel a sense of community, they can learn from each other. And that's at some level, when we're talking about just a virtual world, we lose some of that. I was talking about, I went to an M&A conference last week. I haven't been to a conference in a very long time, since pre-COVID. And yeah, one of my goals was to stay off of airplanes.
Ah, good goal.
I've got way, I've got way too many miles. But I realized also that one of the things, the power of that format is not the conference itself, because I can get that online. I can watch a presentation anywhere, but it's the person you run into at lunchtime between presentations, the person you run into, at the water cooler, whatever, these conversations, side conversations that take place that you never see in a virtual world, and that it's all valuable too.
And it really also gets to the point of that none of us come into things with everything we need, right? We all have gaps in whatever we do. And if you can find other people who can either complement by helping through those gaps, or at least that you can blunder into, you'll find that others are going through a lot of the same things, and great things can come from those happenstance, just like you described. And I think that's something that we lose when we, um, I come up with an idea and then I run it through an AI and put a deck together, and then I make a pitch to people, and then they give money to me. And I'm not, I'm sort of simplifying this whole thing, right? They give money to me, and
Mhm.
now I try to make the business of it. But in a way, there's no foundation that's been built in this thing, where at the very least, if you sort of have, you kind of know an industry, you interact with people, you grow, other people want to get involved, and it sort of takes on a different momentum. And to a certain extent, at least in smaller communities like mine, I feel like um, there's those social connections can often be very, very important for people as they get going. And also as they grow, they're going to need to pull other people in. And it's not like I can hire a bunch of engineers in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So you better know who's around, and the caliber of people you've got. And if you're going to hire somebody from outside, you better be able to explain why you want to live in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and not live in Dallas or Austin or Houston or things
Sure.
like that. So if we want growth, you've got to build up sort of a repertoire to allow you to have that growth if you're not in a major location, right? I mean, that's the advantage of being in these places. If you're in Austin, Texas, or wherever it would be, if you need 10 hardware engineers, you can find them tomorrow. But you go to smaller communities and you're looking for an ASIC design engineer, it's hard to find one in Stillwater, Oklahoma. They better find somebody who wants to buy some land and live out rural. I can help you with that, right? But so I think a lot of times growth is squelched because you don't have enough gasoline to grow if you're not in a community that sort of has all of it around you to make things happen too.
Right. Well, that's one of the advantages of the internet community, internet community around that is you have extended horizons. Well, like I talked about, this guy was doing circuit board layouts, and I'm sure that nobody else in his company lives in the Grand Oregon. They're all over the planet, and they don't have to. And I have in my business a lot of it's virtual too. I have engineers I work with that I haven't probably seen in 20 or 30 years. I mean,
It's great.
in person. I mean, I might see, a little image somewhere. Um, but they're doing a fine job, and we found a way to interact. And so that turns out not to be a limitation. But it is a limitation, but not this it's not it's not a game ending kind of limitation.
And you have a lot of
Um,
experience too, so that helps you to manage a distributed team that somebody else may not be as used to or as easily able to manage that team as well. And that's where, again, being able to help them learn how to manage a distributed team is another kind of service that we can provide as people, grow in various ways. And again, it gives them just another way to help work this out so that things don't go terribly wrong unintentionally. Um,
Right. It takes no, I think you're right on point with that. And it takes a different way of thinking about it too. So I meant what I said about this idea of presence, being around other people. But that's true too. Even if they're working on different business, we work in a WeWork building. You might have people in the same workspace that work on in 30 different enterprises, 30 different startups. And so that's good to be around people. But if I'm building a company too, these days, it's, it's easier to build something virtually. And you can think about it as a virtual kind of fabric, something that's a lot more um, that's distributed, and it just pulls in the pieces you need. But it's easier to build, it's easier to take apart, it's easier to change. So it's a lot more fluid in nature, and I'm not sure that's comfortable to everybody either.
well, certainly not. It's why I think a lot of times entrepreneurs talk about, I can't find anybody to hire who knows how to do things the way I like it. It's very hard from that one to get to two, right? And finding someone else to understand what you're trying to do is very, very difficult. And I think distributed makes it even more so that you have to really understand what it is that you're doing and why, and be able to communicate that to people. And a lot of times entrepreneurs are not good at that because they implicitly know what they want. But if you say, describe it to me, they're not, well, but it's this, and it's being able to communicate that whatever it is to someone else so that that person also understands that vision, conception, whatever you want to call it, so everybody knows here's what we're here to do, right? Kind of stuff. And I think that's really important, and one that oftentimes that beginner entrepreneur, the young entrepreneur, isn't very good at. They're the best salesman for their business because they know they know why it exists. Um, but they'll say, I can't find a good salesman. They don't ever want to sell it the way I want to. Well, it's this. Well, why not? Well, it's because I don't know the same way you know your business. I know. So in a way,
Right. Well, when there's a piece of this too, that's the entrepreneur knows their idea, but turning an idea into a business, that's a tricky thing too, right? So they may know their idea inside and out, but they may not know how to sell their business or, the solution they're offering.
and that gets
So,
back to
so
my
that's
my broad point that there are those that will succeed no matter what we do. There are those that will fail no matter what we do. But there's this group in the middle that I believe with some work, we can help them move through, over a reasonably short period of time to move them to a point where they can get up on their feet and now they're ready to move on and do great things, and that it's worth
Mhm.
putting a little effort into that group of entrepreneurs, because the results over time will pay off much more than what you've put into it to help them out.
Sure. Well, let me, I mean, you brought up another question I'm curious about because and we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about AI in some way because everybody's got to talk about AI these days. But you mentioned the idea of somebody having an idea, putting it into AI, getting out a business plan, and then going to pitch it. And when I talk to students about putting together, especially if they're seeking external financing, putting together a plan, they're like, well, yeah, but what about, people talk about the business model canvas, I should have it on one sheet. It shouldn't take that long. It should be really straightforward. And then I just use Agile to get to a minimum viable product and iterate. And so that should be, real straightforward, which it is if you read the books and follow what people are thinking. Um, but I would say, there's something about a business plan, even if you don't read it or operate, even if you don't read the business plan, once you've put it together and you put it in a drawer, part of the value of a business plan and financial modeling and stuff is that it forces you to understand, to put in the discipline to understand the business. What's the value proposition? How does it work? Who you're targeting? I encourage students to build a model. The investors usually require 3 years pro forma financials anyway. But, if you build that into a model, then you could say, hey, if I have a light June, here's what that looks like. What can I do to boost things up? Do I really need 2 people in customer service, or could I do it with 1? Or do I outsource it? But all of those dynamics, I mean, we can explore before we actually spend $1 on getting the business running, risking capital. And so that I think that discipline is valuable, at least in the stuff that I've worked on. But I mean, do you have a sense at all that maybe AI, while making things easier, might actually take away from that ability to understand the business and how it works? The work and the discipline that goes into creating that.
I mean, it's certainly a concern. I mean, I think even in schools, teachers often talk about, the students get an AI to help write their paper, right? But the value of writing the paper is not the output anyway. It was, we had to go to the library, do my little note cards, and this whole thing was there was a certain amount of discipline involved of learning it. I think the other part is that I really think that a business owner should understand how their business makes money. I mean, whatever it is, right? There's a way you make money, and you need to understand that. And it's not about reading what someone else has done about it. You have to sort of really understand. And whether you're making pizzas or you're developing software, you need to understand how you make money. And without really digging into it and really understanding how that all plays in, you'll never really have a good understanding of how the guts of it work. I mean, why do we make medical school students still take anatomy and do human bodies and stuff like that, right? They can look on the computer and it would show all the 3D and everything. But we try to get them to really understand, because there's a certain amount of, you got to have your hands in something to really understand how it works. And I think
Mhm.
that lack of understanding means that they're not really there could be the case that they're not able to do so. Now, the research side is great. AI is great with that. It can help you conceptualize things a little differently, give you different perspectives. But I see it more of as a tool I use, but I may be hopelessly behind. There's probably some young, brilliant person who says I'm behind on this, that I'm not recognizing what's happening behind me. And I admit, and I've gone through, I want to say, 5 or 6 major technological changes in my life. I've missed every one of them. Um, when I saw the first email, I went, why would I ever want to do that? When I saw the internet, I went, what would I do with that? When I saw mobile phones, I thought, well, but I don't want anybody to call me. I mean, I've missed everyone so far, so I'm maybe not the best person to talk about the next wave because I missed them all. I
Right. Well,
didn't see, I didn't,
it's yeah.
they didn't affect me in the way that I recognized them early on. I wish I had, but I didn't, I didn't. I just
Right.
didn't.
Well,
I saw a Mac, one of the very first Macs. Some kid's parents bought her one. And we went over to the house and looked at it and went, great. can we go do something now? I don't want to sit here. You know what I mean? It's like I've missed them all. So I'm not the best guy to ask about a new technology.
Right. No, when we talk about innovation, though, the Rogers wrote that book about diffusion of innovation, right? It's kind of the seminal work in this area. And he talks about adoption or diffusion being this normal, like a normal curve. And on the front end of that, we've got early adopters. And so there's always people, who have to be the first of everything and try everything. And most of those ideas don't work out. I mean, most of them. and Jeffrey Moore in his Crossing the Chasm, he talks about that going from, early adopters to mainstream. But being mainstream is important too, right? We need to have the people that are going to actually use the product. So I wouldn't feel too bad about not being an early adopter. You've probably saved yourself a bunch of paper cuts.
Yeah, maybe. My friend, he was like, his parents said, you can have an Apple II or you get a new trumpet. That was his decision in high school at the time, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't know what was the right decision, right? I guess he became an engineer, so maybe the Apple II was the right decision for him. But
Oh, but if he's an
America lost
engineer or
a great
if he's
jazz
an
trumpet.
entrepreneur,
Yeah,
he'd find out how to use one of those things to start a business and buy the other.
that's right.
They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
They don't.
You get a trumpet, play his sister's, bar mitzvah, and then, use that money to buy the computer.
Yeah, but again, back to your AI, I think the thing that's nice is that in a community like Stillwater, where I may not have a lot of people in a lot of industries, AI can be a help for that person trying to start a business in an area where there's not a lot of local expertise or knowledge. And so it can be a way to learn things about it. But I still want to see a certain amount of grapple with the actual material directly to show that, if things go sideways, you understand the industry. I worked for a while for a boat company, and when you hire management, if they don't like boating and they're over a boat company, you're going to have a bit of a problem because in the end, you have to understand boating. I mean, there's no amount of AI or MBA or whatever to overcome why do people buy boats and why do they want to be out in them and things like that. And if you don't understand that, you're hopelessly going to have a hard time being a manager of a company that does its boating or hunting, like you said, the muzzle loading or whatever it would be, right? I've got one of my tenants, she does first aid kits for hunting dogs.
Nice.
Sounds like a neat idea. It's going great. She's doing it. But you know what? I said, do you want to get into one of these big box, outdoor kind of places? She says, oh no, they're not good to hunting dog people. They don't treat them the way they should. And I was like, okay, that's the kind of stuff where, that's what I'm looking for in an entrepreneur, where they can say, no, this is why this industry is the way it is. And they really understand it because that's what they love. That helps, I think, a tremendous amount because I think that they really will gain insights that you're not going to get from AI. You're not going to get from talking to somebody else that way because it's not going to know. It doesn't know that industry. Not because it's because there's nobody there making the model with that data, with that knowledge, right? Nobody's in there talking about the hunting dog industry to Claude. So Claude doesn't know. That doesn't mean Claude's bad. It just means nobody's talked to it about that. So.
Well, I mean, I mean, there's a couple of issues there, but one being that this idea that, so to the original point, and I'm sorry, I know that's a little disjointed, but to the original point is I mentioned coaching, sports like football, and there's a certain amount of a certain amount of our success can be tied directly to the discipline associated with practicing, understand doing the physical workout, doing the conditioning, understanding the plays, and then executing them correctly. And, if you just show up on game day and you got an idea, it's not enough. I mean, you have to put in that work and and it comes from effort. So you hate to say grit, but it's required at some level. You've got to put in the effort and do the work. But I mean, going to this idea of AI too, I do, I studied data analytics at Harvard University and we looked at AI, large language models. And I just wonder if there's a concern that, if everybody's using AI and AI is all basing their decisions off these large language models that pull, basically data and success stories from everywhere. and they're using the data to try and illuminate truth. I mean, that's the basic difference is with the kind of search or research we're used to doing. We would start out with a thesis, we'd gather information and try to prove or disprove it. In this case, we're looking at the data and hoping some truth will bubble up from the data. But if everybody's pulling from the same source of data, do we worry that we're not going to get some diversity of ideas, right? And that new ideas might get lost in that process because everybody's pulling from the same resource.
In that game show, how to be a millionaire, want to be a millionaire, right? What were your ways to ask if you didn't know the answer? What could you do? Well, one was ask the crowd, I think, right?
Right.
And usually the
Uh-huh.
crowd is pretty good overall. If you ask 100 people, the majority will roughly end on it, right? And I think to a certain extent, AA is that way, right? It's the voice of the community, and so you're often are good. But another way to do it was to ask an expert, right? Ask somebody who might have expertise in that area, and they may know things that the mass of people may not know at all about things, or maybe the mass is wrong in many ways. So who knows where these models are going to go? I mean, but at least right now, a lot of it is based on what went in and what they come out with, and they're getting very good. But to come up with ideas that no one could have come up with is not been. I've not seen that yet, right? I've seen where they've come
Right.
up with ideas, and those ideas come out of things that have been done, and they may find something
Uh-huh.
I can't find, but it doesn't mean they're coming up with something that nobody's come up with yet, or at least I'm not
Right.
sure.
Well, and part of the innovative process, I mean, even if you think, oh, by the way, back to our other discussion too, this is, I'm not saying you shouldn't do a business model canvas. It's a
Oh,
fine tool.
yeah,
I'm just saying it's probably not enough. We need to do more than that. Um, and it goes back to the grit and the
yeah,
discipline and all of that
that's right.
stuff.
That's right.
Um, but a part of innovation, it comes from not just having a great idea, but it's about this iteration, having an idea and trying it and it doesn't work. And then you try another one and people shoot it down and you try another one. But every time we do one of those iterations, even though it may feel like a waste of time, you've learned something new. And so you accumulate that knowledge over time so that by the time you get to somewhere you think is an endpoint, you've learned an awful lot about the problem and ways to solve it and ways not to solve it. But when dealing with AI, a lot of times we just get an answer. And so you ask yourself, well, am I losing a bunch of knowledge along the way? When in a case where I just get the answer, do I know enough about the problem and the different ways I could solve the problem to really be effective?
Have I somehow missed some of the various paths that could have led to whatever that is? And those paths often give us insight into other things, right? And that's where really interesting things can happen. Um, I d- when I there was a while I did some study. I studied with this design professor, and he often talk. They're always very interested in sort of how do you come up with something innovative? How do you something new? It's this sort of ideas of how we come up with things, and it's this sort of unknown process. But you don't build. Frank Lloyd Wright didn't design his homes from AI. They didn't have it, but you know what I mean? It's a sort of a sense it was his understanding of the way in which humans and buildings interact caused him to design in certain ways, right? And he learned through that experience and it grew into something that's the difference between just, a house built in a normal neighborhood and something that people go and visit and take pictures of, kind of thing.
Right. Well, and you think about that particular example, you think about Frank Lloyd Wright designing architecture, and you could put all of his designs in a small language model
Yeah.
and analyze them all and say, okay, I'm going to design the next Frank Lloyd Wright house. Except Frank Lloyd Wright, he would have another idea by then, right? He would look at the setting and he'd say,
That's right.
oh no, I did that last time. I want to do this. And AI would not have any visibility into that,
And I think that if you
right?
think about
Whatever
it,
that
that's
is.
why a lot of his proteges, a lot of his students never became as famous or as as innovative as he was. And this often happens. It's someone that's a genius or some form of a very innovative person. Their own proteges are rarely as creative, as innovative, as advantaged as the person that sort of started that whole ring, that whole mountain or whatever it would be, the family or the group. And it's interesting. Some have. I think of maybe the guy that started Salesforce came from, of course, working with Larry Ellison, right? That's
Oracle, right? He came from
right.
Oracle.
So he,
Yeah, it was a
but I couldn't tell you any of Michael Dell's proteges. I couldn't tell you any Bill Gates proteges.
yeah,
You
Michael
know,
Dell was different. Yeah,
you know.
the Salesforce, yeah, I used to work with those guys.
Oh,
So
really?
they,
I didn't know
yeah,
that.
because I was responsible at Sequent Computer Systems, computer startup. I was responsible for our global organization, our global relationship with Oracle Corporation.
Okay.
And we had more terabyte, and terabyte doesn't sound like a lot anymore, but terabyte sized databases than anybody in that time frame. And so I spent a lot of time with Oracle and Oracle applications and with the team down there. So that was interesting. Yeah, Salesforce. Part of the problem with Oracle is it was just so expensive that people couldn't afford it. So their idea there was basically to set up a server with Oracle accounting or Oracle finance, and then sell it a seat at a time so that regular businesses could afford to use it. And of course, that turned out to be wildly successful.
I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, but and spawned a whole era of SaaS solutions.
Yeah, really, that sort of idea that this is the way we can present things to people became a huge difference maker. So yeah, I think it's really fascinating. And so this whole process, as we've talked about, entrepreneurship is really about, obviously the value of the entrepreneur is tremendous, because they can come up with these things, and we're there to try to
Yes.
help them along a bit, maybe, if we can.
Yeah, it was Mark Benioff. That's the
Bart
guy who
Benioff.
did that.
Yeah, great. I've
Yeah.
never met any of these. I've only read about this stuff because I was in laterally to those industries for a while. So you kind of know what's going on, but it gets back to this idea about, developing.
Yeah, Dell was different. Dell was all about a channel solution. It wasn't even technology. Basically, when people started, the IBM PC took off, and IBM, of course, is selling to business customers. It costs you $3,000 or $5,000 for a PC for a regular business computer, and Dell figured out that he could put it together in his dorm room. For he puts ads in magazines, people call in, they give him his credit card, and then he can use their money to buy parts and build the thing and ship it out
I think it's
for a
amazing.
fraction of the cost of
Yeah.
IBM. It's a great business model.
And one that still exists, so I think it's interesting. And again, in his dorm room, he wasn't he was no, you know what I mean? He didn't come up from an entrepreneurship program. He didn't come from some whatever. He just sort of started putting these things together, and then he had to get his friends to help out because he's got so many orders, and then he's going to get a little warehouse, and then he just went on and did great. So I think that there's people are there. If you'd have been in the dorm next to him growing up, you might have thought, this guy's crazy. You can't do this out of your dorm room. But he did. And I think that that's another reason why, if he had then said, I need some help growing this thing, wouldn't it have been great if we'd had opportunity to help him? Because look at what it turned out to be. So anyway, I think
Right.
that's
Well,
the big part of it.
and that's one of the things. One of the advantage some entrepreneurs have is that they don't know what they can't do. Right. So often we're told what we can't do, and if we believe that, then we stop. But you know, it, you know, nobody told Jeff Bezos that it was impossible to create a global retail shopping enterprise, especially in the world of Walmart that we live in today. But he did it, and if he would have believed the, naysayers in the beginning, we wouldn't have Amazon.
That's
So
true.
there's this certain amount, it's a balancing act because you don't want to spend all your time doing something that clearly doesn't make sense. But at the same time, you can't be limited by those who don't share your vision.
we just don't know enough about why. I mean, I think that's the sort of, I mean, if there's probably some PhD student that's looking at this, but I think that's I think you're absolutely right. What is it that sort of separates these things? And I don't know, but what I do know is that even someone who doesn't know that they don't know is often there's still things that can be helpful to that person, and maybe they don't need my help, but there are some that do, and so we have to try to find that right balance between the two, and hope that we
Yeah,
get more of those. I mean, I'd love to have someone with the audacity of a Jeff Bezos in my incubator. I'd love that. Um,
sure.
but in the absence of that, there are some really good ideas and people that have good ideas who can carry them along, but don't have as much of that audacity. And if we can help them a bit, I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for all the work you do in your local community. It's super important. But let me do this. I think we're running close to the end on time wise. But if you had any final advice for entrepreneurs, for somebody with an idea that maybe hasn't run a business before or hasn't had the opportunity to realize it, what would you tell them? You
That's a great
know,
question. I think the one thing that I always stress is have a simple business model. Simple doesn't mean it doesn't have many steps. I mean, it should be a fairly straightforward way between how money comes from someone to you and you give back something to them. Whenever I see people with a business model that's, well, people are going to buy this and then that turns into this and then these things happen and then, right? When you get a bunch of steps and they all kind of do this thing and then out the end comes profit, right? I,
okay.
I've never seen many people able to make that complex of a business model work.
Yeah.
So, right, the simpler the model always is better for the vast preponderance of entrepreneurs, right? I'm going to put water in bottles, I'm going to sell you waters or whatever it is. And I think
Yeah. Well,
that's the
that's,
one piece of advice I like to give is if the business model gets too complex, it's just too hard. It's going to be too hard for you to carry it through.
yeah, I
Anyway,
remember, during the internet bubble, you would see these people presenting these plans, and they'd say, "Well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this," and then there was the TMH, and then dollar signs and a big curve, and you're like, "TMH, what is that?"
yeah,
And then magic
big
happens.
magic happens.
It's like, well, no, you got to understand what that is. TMH doesn't work.
That's right. And so they often will run into complex business models I just never see working well. So that's the one piece that I always stress is keep it simple.
Yeah, no, no, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. So I guess what I'd love to do is give you a final chance to, to plug your innovator,
Mhm.
plug an important projects you're working on.
Yep.
Tell us how we can get a hold of you if we're interested in helping out. As we should be. So,
I love it. In terms of getting a hold of us, meridiantech.edu, you can go to our website and you just go to the entrepreneurship section and you can get a hold of me. I'd be delighted to help anybody out if they need it. Little project I've been working on lately. I have a little card I'm showing here, but anyway, Oklahoma has a lot of artists, visual artists, creative, plastic artists, people of that sort, and they often are looking to try to figure out how to make some money at your art. And so one of the projects I've been involved in here in the state of Oklahoma is we call it entrepreneurship, trying to help artists create better businesses for their art. And it's something that obviously we have a lot of native tribal members here in Oklahoma. That's a very popular thing for many of them to do their art. We have a lot of artists in general in Oklahoma. So I think I think that a community that has a strong arts often is a very creative community and is a great entrepreneurial community. So I'm not just purely doing this out of the just good naturedness, but I also believe that there's a lot of great artists out there that for various reasons aren't able to get their art out in front of people. And so it's some little project we've been working on, we're trying to do here in Oklahoma. And so I think that entrepreneurship or arts and entrepreneurship, arts and business is an area that is one that we can have fruitful here in Oklahoma, and it's a little project we've been working on. So if people are interested in that topic, that's certainly one that I'm trying to understand better, not being someone who's tremendously creative as an artist or anything like that. So anyway, that's something we're working on.
No, I think it's good. I mean, I'm glad you're able to do that in the community. It's funny because when we explore entrepreneurship, we also talk about the idea that it's not always what you think. So one of the people we featured was a country music singer, and she's an entrepreneur, right? She's building a business. She's got a brand and she's got a product or music, and she needs to figure out how to be successful with that. And especially these days when all the revenue is going to streaming, which is, is not highly lucrative for most artists. But you think about, Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is a brand. He's an athlete, but he's a brand,
Sure.
and so artists, musicians, athletes, I mean, these are all entrepreneurs, even though they may not know it. Um, so it's interesting. Well, important work. And thank you for doing what you do in the local community. I mean, it's all a good thing. Um, For our listeners, if today's conversation sparks some ideas about your own business ideas, your own growth strategies, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at wilson@zairmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. If you go to our primary website, www.zairmail.com, that's like airmail with a Z on the front, you'll find a big toll-free number there. Call that number. We answer the phone. We want to talk to our customers. You definitely won't end up at a call center in the Philippines. But, so we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to help if we can, whether it's our business or something entirely different. We're always happy to help. So thank you for joining us on Direct Edge. Feel free to reach out to Brad. I know he's got a lot of great ideas too. Remember, sustainable competitive advantage comes from building strategies that leverage your core competencies. Identify what makes your organization offering unique and valuable, and then embrace that as your core, both when operating and planning for the future. Thank you for being here with us, everyone. And if you ever have ideas or suggestions, just let us know. Thank you so much. Brad, thank you for being here.
Bye. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.